Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast, Episode 107.
This is Cheryl Todd of Gun Freedom Radio.
And I'm the other guy, Dan Todd, reminding you that we and the show you are listening to are proud members of the Self-Defense Radio Network.
Find out more and check out all of the other great shows and content at selfdefenseradio.net.
Welcome to the Out of Order Podcast, your window into the firearms community, exploring those shaping the future of our rights and protecting our lifestyle, laws, legal cases, activism, and self-defense in a candid and honest podcast for our brothers and sisters in arms. Here's your host, James Kalita.
Thanks for tuning in to episode 107 of the Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast. Show notes page for today's episode is outoforderjameskalita.com/107. Today's episode is sponsored by ScotShot, scotshot.com, NRA certified firearm and range safety training. Whether you are taking a class as a complete beginner or an experienced, highly competent shooter seeking an NRA instructor certification, ScotShot classes are comfortable, friendly, and taught with a high instructor-to-student ratio. So head over to scotshot.com and check out their upcoming courses. Today's episode is also sponsored by Gift for Gun Nuts, giftforgunnuts.com, where you get great gift ideas for hunting and shooting enthusiasts on your holiday shopping lists. Right now they're giving away a Henry 22. So if you head over to giftforgunnuts.com between now and December 22nd, you can enter for a chance to win a Henry Classic 22 rifle. So today's guest is Kevin Dixie. Kevin is the founder of NOC Firearms Training and Aiming for the Truth. And now, here's Kevin.
Hi, Kevin.
Hello.
How are you?
Hey, how are you?
Good, good. Great. Now still a good time?
Yeah, we're good. We are ready to roll.
All right. And you're the founder of NOC Firearms Training, and with one other organization too. I was just reading, right?
Yeah, No Other Choice Firearms Training, or NOC Firearms Training, and a community program called Aiming for the Truth.
Aiming for the Truth. Great. All right. All right. Any questions before we get started?
No, ready to roll.
All right, we'll start in 3, 2, 1. Kevin Dixie, welcome to the show.
Hey, man, thanks for having me. How are you?
Oh, very good, thanks. My pleasure. So, Kevin, you're the founder of NOC Firearms Training. Would you tell us a little about that?
Sure. No Other Choice Firearms Training is a training company out of St. Louis, Missouri, although we do travel. A training company that is about focusing on making sure that you understand your mindset going into any conflict with any kind of skill set or tool. You should be at a point of no other choice before you ever deploy those skills, even if the law allows it. You have to be able to extend people mercy as long as that mercy doesn't get you or another innocent person hurt. So it's about conditioning the mind before you use any skill set I teach you or that you have or any tool that's in your hand to hurt any human being. Sometimes people do foolish things. They could hurt you, but if they can get away from the situation without you hurting them and you're not being hurt, then all the better.
Yeah, and that's an important mindset. I don't think I've heard it described that way before. And as I try to put myself in that spot, it almost sounds like it would take more time to go through mentally through that approach. Do you find that, or do you have methods of?
No. I can see how you can come to that conclusion, but really, if you start off like before I start any training class, just for example, before I start any training class, we have this conversation about philosophy, mindset going into it, right? And it's something that I hope people repeat to themselves. And I know what you're saying is, what about in the heat of the battle, right? How do you consider that? It's really something you already have to do. I'm just making you pay attention to it. And what I mean by that is, cameras are recording almost everything we do, right? ATMs, grocery stores, traffic cameras, things like that, cell phones. So let's just say bad guy approaches good guy, and bad guy has a knife, and bad guy is about to stab said good guy, right? And let's say you went to ABC company, and that company taught you, hey, somebody has a knife, somebody says they're going to hurt you, you pull your gun and you shoot and kill them, right? But let's just say that this individual is, let's call it 25 feet from you. So he's right outside of your 21-foot bubble of comfort. And he starts approaching you. Say you trained enough to get your gun out, get your gun on target, and you're ready to squeeze. And he drops the knife or turns and runs. What people have been conditioned to do is squeeze the trigger. Once the gun comes out, squeeze the trigger. But what if the camera catches that individual turning around or the knife gets dropped? Now, your mind isn't, remember, we're always reacting to situations, right? So things are moving faster than we can keep up with them. And so if you depress that trigger when that knife is boggling on the ground because your body alarm response is all over the place and you didn't take those things into consideration, now you just went from self-defense to potential murder or manslaughter. So it's more about amplifying things you should already be paying attention to. And another reason it helps is this. If we can start the conversations in the minds of everyday citizens and even people that's job or it's to defend us, whether it's law enforcement, military, whatever, if we can start them teaching everyday citizens and explaining it to them and everyday citizens understanding it as they get more and more into the firearms, then they'll respect it more. They'll understand, like, this is a last measure. I want it. I'm going to have the skill set to use it, but please don't make me use it. Unfortunately, in our society, because it's so tactical based, a lot of guys just go off the tactical functions and things of that nature, but that's not what you do when you go to Walmart. It's a different approach.
Sure. And so, Kevin, how did you become involved in firearms training?
I spent roughly 10 years with the St. Louis City Police Department in a division called the Prisoner Processing Division. And while I was there, when I got to the PD the first day, they threw us in the back of a paddy wagon. They took us down, and we got some basic firearms training. It was my first professional involvement with firearms, and I'll tell you why that's a big deal in a second. And so I walked in the room. There were no less than 70 guns around the room, and there are these 5 guys standing at the front of the room, the baby of which I believe had 30 years of instruction under his belt, the baby. So they weren't there to play. Those guys were really about serious business, effective marksmanship. And so I just became a student of it from like day one. I just became a student, and I began to kind of stalk it. And it just infected me. It's like not just the gun, but how does it work? Why does it work? Why did you tell me to move this way, aim my sight that way? What does this trigger thing do? It makes it go bang, but how does it make it go bang? I just fell in love with it. And seeing what I had to deal with as far as crime goes and growing up in inner city and then working on the police side of things, seeing these guys coming in that I'm responsible for that are committing everything from simple petty crimes all the way up to murder and everything in between. We dealt with a couple of serial killers. I've dealt with a lot of different people. So I tell folks that there are walking, talking, evil movie characters in your neighborhoods, and you just don't realize it, right? And so how can I apply what I've learned and will continue to learn to help everyday citizens and law enforcement, things like that, but I really focus on the everyday person. How can I help them be efficient to where they can really, really drive home those skills? So that's how I got started. But the biggest thing that I drew out of that was make the most out of your opportunity. So I knew we had a lot of people out doing tactical instruction. If you put SWAT team member this or Navy SEAL that or Delta Force this on your resume, you have people flocking to you for training. Not saying that that's a bad thing. However, when I pulled the data and started asking a lot of questions and even took training myself, I've trained with a lot of tier 1 guys. The training they didn't really retain the information because a lot of their student base wasn't there for that level. So, I had a lot of people go through tier 1 training, and by the time I get my hands on them a couple of years afterwards, they can't even hit a target from 10 yards away. They can't even really hit a B-27 center mass. So it was elevated, and I think we missed an opportunity to that market. So I just wanted to fill that gap and give everyday citizens a chance to survive.
Wow, great. And you also founded another organization, Aiming for the Truth. Would you tell us a little about that?
Sure. Aiming for the Truth is a community outreach program. So my background is I did grow up in the inner city of St. Louis. I grew up in North St. Louis in an area called Walnut Park. I'm not going to spend time talking about how bad it was. Let's just say when I came out of my front door, 4 houses down was a tombstone retailer, and the city's largest cemetery was directly across the street from that. So within 30 seconds, I can be at a tombstone retailer and to the city's largest cemetery in the city's worst crime-ridden area. So growing up was very interesting. But what I noticed when I got even when I was a teenager, but it really came together when I became an adult and I was working at the PD, is I noticed that there were a lot of people that were evil, true enough, but there were even more people that were just making bad decisions, just didn't have a fair shake. They just didn't have information. Not not bad people, they just made bad decisions. And that was really the majority of folks. And so I wondered, how could I help? I was already going back, talking to guys in my old neighborhood and talking to kids that were younger than me. I was 22, 23 when I started doing this stuff. And already talking to kids younger than me, 10 years old, 15 years old, trying to really give them some insight. And I also had friends asking me for encouragement, like, how did you come out of that environment and make it? And I was like, you know what? Instead of me running around helping everybody, I want to start a program. And that program is aiming for the truth. So it is a play on gun terminology, right? Aiming for the truth. However, it's a way to help people and to also make sure that we are amplifying the protection of our 2A rights. And by doing that, I want to aim for the truth around violence. I don't want people blaming guns, cars, bricks, bats, propane, fire, whatever. Let's aim for the truth around violence. So the program helps people deal with mental illness, which I think is a large factor. And my life is actually walked through doing this program. So, for example, when we talk about mental illness, and for every subject I'm going to mention here, we have, or we try to get, or I talk about a professional in the room that actually has a business or has professional studies under their belt to help people out. So we're not just talking, we're actually giving you a path to healment in these areas. But mental illness, for an example, I tell the story very openly about my first encounter with a handgun. And that encounter was, I was 13, close to 14 years old. A friend of mine from a few houses up comes down to my house. He's like, hey, man, you got to come see something cool. So I follow him over to his house. We go into his mom's bedroom, and there's a handgun. All right, and we're fumbling with this string, trying to figure out. We found the ammo. We're trying to figure out how to get it loaded. We finally figured it out, and we go out on the back porch and we shoot it. I was like, man, that was pretty awesome, right? And we shoot it again a couple of times. And what I found out roughly a month later, because of a lot of things I went through in my upbringing, from rape, molestation, drug dealing, prostitution, single parent household, foster care. I mean, I really had it bad as a child. And what I noticed about 30 days later, when one of my neighbors, thank God he cared enough to talk to me, is that the reason that I liked the gun so much wasn't because of the mechanical aspect of the firearm. It's because I wanted my depression and my anxiety to go away, which I was diagnosed with soon thereafter the firearm. I basically wanted to commit suicide. So that's why I fell in love with the gun. It's because it can make all the pain and all the suffering and all the bad thoughts and all the bad memories, it can make all those things disappear. And I didn't realize that till I pulled the trigger. I'm like, all right. So, but just thank God that I had at least one person around that noticed it and referred me to some help, and I went and got the help I needed. That being said, being a child, I realized that mental illness is a big part of it. I'm roughly, I think, 10 years sober from any form of depression or anxiety, where I've actually gotten it under control and I'm pretty good to go. And so I tell people that those conditions need to be addressed. I'm clinically depressed at 14 years old is a hard thing to overcome, but I did it, right? And I did it without the assistance of medications. So how can we help people deal with that? Because if the mind's not healthy, the body's not healthy. And if people are doing things that are violent, a lot of times it's because they're angry. It might not be mental illness per se, but anger is a condition that is unhealthy. And a lot of people are growing up in environments that foster anger, right? And not only anger, but it's uncontrolled. You don't know how to manage it or mitigate it. And then we talk about rebuilding the families. Families are truly the cornerstone of society, in my opinion, and we've lost that. Now, although I came up in a single-parent household, I fantasized about having a mom and a dad and what that looked like. And I had a couple of friends that did have that environment, and their environment was just healthier. It was just simple. It wasn't guaranteed, but it was healthier. What does that structure look like, and how do we start reintroducing that structure into society? Whether you are co-parenting or parenting in the same home, whatever the case may be, how do we make sure you have the assets to be healthy in that? Another thing is getting fathers to be encouraged back in their kids' lives. So we talk about elevating the man. How do we do that? Elevating the man comes from giving him the tools needed to go out there and be a better man in society and a better father. So for a couple of years, I ran a program sponsored by the NFL that was started by Tony Dungy, former head coach of the Indianapolis Colts. And I ran that program for 2 years out of a local elementary school, and it was awesome. And I was able to put roughly 70 fathers back into the lives of their children. And it was a great feeling. I mean, we shed tears, and the kids are really getting out how they feel. The dads are being held responsible, and it was awesome to see those families united. All right. And so now those are dads that are invested in their kids. They don't have time to be doing anything foolish to take them away from this new relationship. And that child is holding them responsible. You or I can't really hold them responsible when that child can. So getting fathers back involved with their kids, because then we are not just fixing one mind, we are fixing generations. Right. So that's the way we approach that. And we also want to give people employment or employment skills. I've had a lot of people approach me and say, hey, man, I'll be honest, I'm 35, 40 years old, and I don't even know how to tie a tie, let alone write a resume. Never had to do that before. And I'm too embarrassed to ask. Well, I'm grateful that I'm a source where you can at least come ask. And if I don't have the time to show you, we get you the resources of different organizations like Connections to Success in St. Louis that helps you out with those things, getting you clothes for interviews for free or very cheap. I went there a couple of times and picked up a couple of ties for like 50 cents a piece. I mean, it's really reasonable stuff. And it gets you things situated for yourself where you can go out and be prepared to gain employment, because if you don't have employment interview skills, you can't gain employment. It's almost impossible. So how can we give guys a first shake and get them the tools they need before they even walk in the door? And if they're working, nobody has time to be trying to deprive you of things because they're working too hard to supply and support all the aforementioned stuff I just mentioned. And so those are the spokes we go through. And then once we help people build equity back into their lives, and they can see that equity, they can imagine the hard work, and they can use the resources available that day to help them get started on that. Once you teach people how to build equity into their life, then my question I pose to them is simply this. Now that you see a life worth living, or you have some of the resources you need, I want you to close your eyes. And I want you to imagine if there's anybody on God's green earth that will deprive you of the life you are going to work hard towards. Unanimously, everybody agrees. They associate it with it however they want to, but unanimously, everybody agrees. Okay, now let's talk about protecting that equity. Now let's talk about the Second Amendment. Now let's go through why your gun rights are so important. And so we kind of walk through the history real briefly, because it's more of a community outreach program than it is a quote-unquote 2A event. But it's part of me, and it's something they should know as they're working hard to develop their lives. And I cover that from a historical perspective, not necessarily a constitutional one. I start historically because I want to make it personal. I want them to feel it personally in their hearts. And then we can say, hey, by the way, this thing is protected by the Constitution. So not only should you feel it, it's legally yours. And how do we protect it? And then from there, we break bread. Normally we have food there for people so they can come eat for free. We offer round trip transportation. If anybody needs to catch a bus or something like that, public transportation, we'll reimburse you round trip if you show up. We also provide free, and I normally work with any local firearm instructor. Like if I'm traveling, I'll make sure there's a firearm instructor I'm working closely with, and I have that instructor offer free training to all the families that attended. So when the families come back, they are going to get free firearm safety training, just to make sure the kids and the parents are all okay around guns. And if you have someone who's a felon or something like that can't own guns, it doesn't mean you can't teach their kids how to be careful around guns, because if there's not a gun in the house, there can be a gun, at a friend's house, at a family member's house, or something like that. So we want to make sure the family is educated on firearms. So you get that free as well. So we try to make sure that I'm bringing an event that can actually help heal the machine, that machine being the person, so we can actually kill violence at its roots. And let's get to the sources of violence instead of blaming an inanimate object that has no soul or no motives of its own.
Wow, that's incredible. And 70 families. So how do you start? How do you find people? How do you take that first step and kind of get people back together?
The cool thing with the school program, the school did a lot of the legwork for me. So yeah, the kids were in the school already, so it's a matter of just sending letters home to parents and giving them benefits like, hey, come up, have some donuts with us, kind of, bait and switch them a little bit, But the school was a great resource for that. Now I'm relying on, I'm not shy about talking wherever I go, talk like I'm talking to you today or people in person. And I try to make sure that I use all the platforms available, social media, if you will, word of mouth, local organizations, to just put it out there, just to get it everywhere. So when people hear about it, we can set up events in cities around the country and they feel comfortable to come. And I would like to add, this is not just for people that can legally own guns. Felons are allowed to come to this event. We aren't there showing guns. We're there really dealing with the root issues, right? And just because you're a felon doesn't mean you still have criminal intent in your heart. Say you paid your debt to society, but you still need a job. And if we can't get that guy a job or that lady a job that made a mistake previously, and we can't give them something to focus on, like their family and understanding what conflict is, that's something else we talk about, identifying conflict and how to resolve it. And if we can't get them to understand those things and have something to look forward to, well, then guess what they're going to do? They're going to resort to something that is criminal, and you could be the victim of that. So I want to, everybody's welcome. Everybody is welcome. And even though I know they can't exercise the 2A rights, I like to tell people, do not allow that to be a reason why you don't show up and bring your family. because you know what? Your kid didn't make that mistake yet, all right? And so just like when I have conversations with a lot of individuals that can't legally own firearms, they often say, I wish I wouldn't have forfeited that right. I wish I would have known. I would have corrected my actions. I would have done something different, because now I've paid for it. It's been 15 years and I still can't protect my family. Well, let's get that over to your child. And let's make sure your child understands that, so that we're keeping them on the straight and narrow path. And then when they get to adult age, they can legally possess and own a firearm, so they can protect your grandkids, right? So we just beat the streets, use social media, use platforms, use word of mouth. I'm blessed to have been on several big programs. I work on a lot of different NRA programs. Right before I started this interview with you, I was just on with Dana Loach. I've done tons of work with Coley on the War, Grant Stinchfield. I mean, you name them, I've worked with them over there. Instructors around the country. I'm going to forget names if I start naming them, but I'll name a few. James Yeager. Just recently started conversations over Rob Pincus. We'll see how that goes. Ken Scott with Provectus Group. So because I am a trainer, obviously I'm keeping tabs on the training community, so they can at the same time tell their communities, and just to get the word out there, because like even Rob Pincus is working with Walk the Talk America. And so we can show how we can unify each other and get stronger just by getting the word out. And because I have a unique way of pitching the message, I like to say if everybody helps me get the people in front of me, I guarantee you a change in lives. We're not just going to be there talking; we're actually getting the work done.
Great, thank you. And so I always ask my guests if there are books they recommend that every gun owner should listen to, either about politics, shooting. Any come to mind?
Politics. No, I'll shy away from that one. I will. Well, there's one psychological book that I would recommend, and it's only because it's always on the. I guess it does tie into politics, and it can deal with training, I guess, a little bit. It's called. It's by Robert Hughes, Psychology of the Black Child. It's a pretty good book to read. And then there's one more I just picked up from. Oh God, what is the name of that book? I'm going to be remiss if I could get up. It's like 5 feet from me, but I don't want to mess up the audio by getting up, going over there. But that one I will start with by Robert Pugh. It's called Psychology of a Black Child. And it's a good book to read because it's helping you identify conditions. And it doesn't matter if the child's black, white, Asian, Hispanic. It's identifying the issues of children as they come up and how the mind has been developed, determined around their environment. So what environment is this child experiencing? Like we can question what environment have the mass shooters around the country experienced, right? Like what environment was that? It might have been suburban, but what was inside that house, right? So it helps identify these things. That way we can kind of address the mind as well. So that would be one that I recommend.
And how can people find you? Websites, what's the best way?
Yeah, you can reach me several ways. Website is nootherchoice.net, just nootherchoice.net. On Facebook, you can go to NOC Firearms Training and also KD of NOC. And you can also go to my personal page. That's Kevin. My last name is Dixie, D as in dog, IXIE. Also on Instagram, it's at NOC Firearms Training and also KD of NOC. You can always email at noccccw@gmail.com or training@nootherchoice.net. And you can, if anybody wants to help out with the movements, you can always go over to GoFundMe /aiming for the truth, or Patreon /NOC Firearms, or also on PayPal.me /NOC Firearms. And so all those avenues, you can reach me, communicate with me, or help out.
Great. I thank you so much for being on the show. Any parting words for our listeners?
I would just like to say that consider and be kind to your fellow man. Understand that there are going to be, I understand we just got past midterms and this political climate is really heightened right now. And so there's a lot of arguing and arguing on all sides of issues, healthcare, taxes, gun rights, things of that nature. Just remain who you are, remain strong in character. Remember, intelligence is the proper application of knowledge, and be intelligent with the way you apply your knowledge. And that does sometimes result in the way that you're communicating with people, because we need to realize at the end of the day, we're all Americans. We're trying to fight different battles. We have different culture wars going on, different things that we find personal. But at the same time, for the Second Amendment community, let's make sure that we are conveying a message that we're going to stand on our rights, but we're also going to be cordial and considerate of other people's feelings, because that's going to help us out a long way into the future.
I thank you so much for being on the show, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
All right, likewise, sir. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again for tuning in to episode 107 of the Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast. Show notes page for today's episode is outoforderjameskalita.com/107. And please remember to check out our sponsors, scotshot.com and Gift for Gun Nuts. At scotshot.com, you get NRA certified firearm and range safety training. Whether you are a beginner or experienced, whether you want rifle, pistol, shotgun, NRA certified classes, or you want to become a NRA certified instructor. You can get safe, comfortable classes at scotshot.com with a high instructor to student ratio. And at Gift from Gun Nuts, from now until December 22nd, you can enter for a chance to win a Henry Classic 22. So head over to giftforgunnuts.com and check them out.